Hi, I'm Richard Pennington. You know, when I've taught legal aspects in public procurement over the years, one of the most difficult topics to get my arms around and find examples for was the Uniform Commercial Code. You know, we've always been taught that the UCC applies in transactions and goods, meaning really things like purchase orders for supplies. And the most entanglement for me came in the acceptance provisions and what happens at the time of tender of delivery, what's rejection, what's revocation of acceptance. Our family just recently bought a new refrigerator, and we had an issue with it that I'm going to use as an example. Why is it important? Because really it's one of the statutes that applies not only in commercial transactions or consumer transactions, but in public procurement also when you're buying supplies. So allow me just for a minute to tell you the story and how that hooks into some of the things we learn about in acceptance and something called revocation of acceptance, and also where warranties fit in. This is the story of our refrigerator. So this is our refrigerator. We bought this at a big box retail store. It was delivered by two gentlemen in a truck. They brought it in, opened it up, looked like the right model. They set it up in the kitchen, and we proceeded to put enough in it so we could make sure that it was working in the refrigerator and the freezer compartment. The ice maker was on the left-hand side in the door. This is a picture most recently taken. They're showing the cubes behind a little window there. And to the top of the ice maker was where the actual water went in and into the freezing compartment, into the tray that loaded the ice maker. Well, what happened was that about 4 or 5 days after we got it, we noticed a small drip in the dispenser, a drip of water. Weren't really sure what it was. And then a couple of days later, when we opened it, we noticed it was a block, a solid block of ice. There were no cubes. And the ice maker wasn't dispensing ice. Well, we wondered, you know, we had actually read issues about ice makers. My mother had had problems with one after we'd purchased one once before. And it got me thinking in the context of what we learn in public procurement. What was I going to do about this? Well, let's talk about the UCC part of this, the Uniform Commercial Code in Sales. The time of acceptance is important because that's the time after the tender of delivery, in that period when the obligation to pay normally arises if you're working on invoices. Of course, I'd already paid for it using a credit card, so that wasn't going to be an issue. But I did know that the time of acceptance does have certain rights and certain obligations and things that are triggered by that period. You know, if, as it says here on B, if you don't make an effective rejection, then you're deemed to have accepted. And if this had come and we opened it up and it had the wrong model, for example, or the right model, but it was a top and bottom refrigerator freezer configuration and totally hadn't complied with the order, I could have at that time rejected. But it looked fine, and so it was installed as often happens, and we essentially used it about 4 days or so. That triggers subsection C of the UCC. Now, that is having an act that's inconsistent with seller's ownership, as in we started loading it up. And in many cases, what you think is a rejection really goes into this part of the code, which is after acceptance, then what are the remedies? Because you really have started using the item. And that gets into the revocation of acceptance. Now, some of you may be asking about these numbers at the top, and those section numbers are from the Uniform Commercial Code that was promulgated in order to come up with a uniform commerce approach to many of these issues. And your statute And most of you, all of you virtually, are going to have adopted this. Louisiana's got a slightly different version of this, but many of the concepts are the same. But your section numbers may be different, but often are going to be similar, at least in the 2-608 part of this. And in section 2-608 in the UCC, it talks about revocation of acceptance. Can you change your mind? And this is what the basic criteria are. That if it's been delivered with a reasonable assumption that nonconformity would be cured, then you probably can go back and revoke your acceptance. Or if it's been induced by the difficulty of discovery. And I probably had both of these here, because when the gentlemen were here that did the delivery, and they were agents of the retailer, they said, hey, if you've got any problems, just give us a call. Which led me to believe that I did have issues with defects in terms of this, that they'd take care of it. That may have triggered the reasonable assumption that nonconformity would be cured and prevent me from having, under the UCC, to issue a written letter notice to the manufacturer that we were revoking acceptance, copying the retailer, letting them know specifically what was wrong, and that is the ice maker wasn't working. And then second, it was difficult to discover at the time of delivery. We had no idea until 4 or 5 days in. And would it have been substantially impaired the value? You know, if I'd had a scratch on the side of it, that'd been one thing. But this really is a significant, reason we buy these types of machines, to have ice makers and ice. Reasonable time wasn't an issue. It hadn't sit in a warehouse, for example, for 6 months before anybody plugged it in to look at it. This was within the first week. Now, as you all know, it's not this simple, because most of the time you don't just have Uniform Commercial Code remedies. The code itself says that sellers and buyers can change these things, and normally they are. What did we have? Well, we had this. We had a warranty that was issued really at the same time as the purchase, that went along with the purchase. And I'm going to show you just 2 parts of this so you can see a little bit how this works. One of the things was a disclaimer of warranties. And the disclaimer of warranties, to be effective, first of all, has to be conspicuous. And that's why you see this on your sales documents in all caps letters usually. This was actually a fairly friendly one. This said that implied warranties not were disclaimed, but were limited to 1 year or the shortest period allowed by law. So they were putting a fence around the disclaimer here. Now, what are these warranties? Well, let's talk about the one that probably didn't apply, the warranty of fitness for a particular purpose. If I'd gone to the retailer and said, okay, I'm going to use this in a very hot and humid building, no air conditioning, so the ambient temperature is going to be somewhere around 85 and 90 in the summertime, I need it to work. That'd be an example where the seller was aware that we were doing something with the product to meet our specific needs. And if that had been represented to me orally at the time of sale, this disclaimer probably would have taken care of that. Well, I didn't have that. We were using the refrigerator like most people do in a kitchen. So that really didn't become an issue. The other one probably did, and that is the warranty of merchantability. That's a warranty that says that the item is going to pass without an objection in the trade or the industry involved. And even without any kind of overt expressions of what the capabilities of the refrigerator were, if we were buying a refrigerator with an ice maker, the expectation would have been that the ice maker would have worked and you wouldn't have had a block of ice sitting in there, interfering with the mechanism and really not permitting any kind of ice making in it. So that probably did get disclaimed by this warranty. Now, was that fatal? No, because there were all kinds of express warranties that were part of the bargain that came in the literature that was delivered with the refrigerator that talked about the ice maker and how it worked. So even with this disclaimer, it probably didn't become very much of a problem here, because everything I needed was in writing in the product literature. The one that probably did have an issue or affect the transaction was this one on that limited warranty provision. Take a minute to read it. It's not like many that you commonly see, maybe in your public procurement experience, from 1 year of purchase that the manufacturer would pay for the parts and repair labor to correct defects in materials or workmanship. Well, this had happened, 4 or 5 days after delivery. So it was clear that the defect existed there. And so this was really an express warranty that came with the product. This wasn't disclaimed. And I would note that often you'll see a disclaimer of express warranties. And I think almost universally now there's an agreement that that doesn't disclaim things like this that are written in the product literature or in the warranty terms itself. What that is intended to do is disclaim those kinds of representations that might have occurred in the store orally as a basis for the bargain, as, for example, as I illustrated. And that is, if I'd said, we're using this in a warehouse, there's not going to be any cooling. It's going to be 40 degrees. We need to be able to cool and make ice. And so I need something that's got that capability. That would have been perhaps an express warranty, a basis of the bargain, not in writing. And this would have effectively eliminated that as a basis for a revocation of acceptance. Now, the important part of this one is the last sentence, that the sole and exclusive remedy under this warranty is product repair. That basically eliminated my ability immediately to say, I'm revoking acceptance. I'm going to change my mind. As it turned out, this had a happy ending. We had actually 2 visits. They found out there was a water valve defect that controlled the water not only to the water dispenser, but also to the ice maker. And it wasn't completely closing off. It was allowing some leakage into the tray. The tray was overflowing, dripping into the ice cubes that had been initially made, and eventually they just froze solid. Now, how long could that have gone on? Hard to say. There does come a time when a remedy fails of its essential purpose under the UCC. Now, my guess is here that the discretion to replace the product after 3 or 4 of these problems, that might have been exercised just to save the money involved in coming out, trying again because we had a lemon. But that was really at the discretion of the manufacturer. If it's gone on 10 or 12 times, would that remedy of repair have failed of its essential purpose because we got no repair? Well, that might be something you'd want to talk to counsel about before you exercise that. Because you're also going to have to know, what am I going to get for damages? There's lots of what ifs in that sort of remedy. So that's the story of our refrigerator and how revocation of acceptance existed, but many of the documents changed the available remedies. But I hope that you have a little better feel for how those things hook together, how the UCC applies even in government business. I'll do one additional caveat, and that is that the UCC doesn't apply in other than goods transactions. So if you're trying to script a service inspection and acceptance clause, the UCC is not going to help you fill in that gap. One thing I advise people to do is go to the federal government. They have developed inspection and acceptance clause that sort of pick up the idea of revocation of latent defects, difficult to discover defects, in not only their goods, but also their services contracts. And it's a good place to start to try to find contract language to accomplish this thing. Hope you learned something here you didn't know. Thank you.